I am an architect by trade and by nature. My life, much like the buildings I design, relies on the integrity of the foundation. If the concrete is poured correctly, if the steel rebar is tied with precision, the structure will stand against the wind and the rain of the Pacific Northwest. I believe in load-bearing walls. I believe in safety margins. I believe that if you follow the blueprints, the result will be exactly what you intended. For the last 3 years, my marriage to Emily has been the most beautiful structure I have ever built. She was the aesthetic facade to my structural pragmatism. Where I was gray steel and glass, she was warm timber and soft light. She was 29, 5 years my junior, with a laugh that could make the relentless Seattle drizzle feel like a spring shower. And now, she was carrying our child. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a day that should have been unremarkable. The rain was drumming a steady, hypnotic rhythm against the large bay windows of our living room in Bellevue. The house was quiet. Emily was out, ostensibly at her prenatal yoga class, a ritual she adhered to with religious devotion. I had taken the afternoon off work to finish the nursery. It was a surprise. I wanted to assemble the crib, a complex piece of Scandinavian furniture that arrived in 3 heavy boxes before she returned. The room smelled of fresh, low VOC paint, a soft shade of sage green she had chosen months ago. I was on my knees on the plush carpet, surrounded by an array of screws, wooden dowels, and incomprehensible diagrams. My phone was buzzing with work emails, but I ignored them. My focus was here, on the future. I realized I needed a specific screwdriver I had left in the garage. As I stood up, my foot caught the edge of the rug, and I stumbled, knocking into the small side table where Emily's old tablet sat charging. It was a device she rarely used anymore, having upgraded to the latest phone, but we kept it as a backup for streaming music or reading recipes. The tablet clattered to the floor. I winced, hoping the screen hadn't cracked. I picked it up. The screen was intact, but the jolt had woken the device. It wasn't locked. It was then that the notification appeared. It wasn't a text message. It was a calendar alert, a synchronization from the cloud. The digital ecosystem of our lives was usually tightly controlled, but Emily was not tech-savvy. She often forgot that devices linked to the same account would mirror each other. 1,400 hours, meeting with M and C. Payment due. I frowned. It was 1:55 p.m. The yoga class was on the other side of town, and it usually ran until 3. Who were M and C? And what payment? I stared at the screen. My architect's brain, trained to spot deviations in a blueprint, twitched. A hairline fracture. A discrepancy. My finger hovered over the calendar icon. I knew, in that moral part of my mind, that I should put the tablet down. Privacy is the mortar that holds a relationship together. But another part of me, the part that ensures a building won't collapse under stress, needed to verify the structural integrity. I tapped the notification. The calendar opened. It wasn't just one entry. It was a recurring event. Every Tuesday and Thursday for the last 4 months. The location pin wasn't the yoga studio in Redmond. It was a geotag for a location in South Seattle, near the industrial district, a place called the Blue Horizon Motel. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I sat down on the floor, the unfinished crib forgotten. The rain lashed harder against the glass. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Why would my pregnant wife be going to a motel twice a week? I navigated away from the calendar and opened the photo gallery. The cloud sync had been busy while the device lay dormant. Recent photos from her phone had uploaded automatically. There were the usual shots, selfies of her baby bump, pictures of potential strollers, shots of the dinner she cooked last week. But then, interspersed among the domestic bliss, were images that didn't fit. A photo of a document. It was blurry, taken in haste. I zoomed in. It looked like a passport page, but not an American one. The lighting was poor, but I could make out the face. It wasn't Emily. It was a man. Dark hair, sharp features. The name was obscured by the flash glare. Another photo. A stack of cash. $20 bills banded together. Another. A screenshot of a text conversation. The contact name was just a period. A dot. Message. We need more time. The application is stalled. Reply. Not my problem. Bring the cash, or we talk to him. Talk to him. I was him. I stood up, the tablet gripping my hand like a stone. The silence of the house, once peaceful, now felt heavy, suffocating. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was a mistake. It had to be. Maybe she was helping a friend? Emily was kind, sometimes too kind. Maybe she was being extorted? But the meeting notification. Payment to do it. I looked at my watch. 2:05 p.m. If the calendar was right, she was there now. I didn't make a conscious decision to leave. My body simply went into autopilot. I grabbed my keys and my coat. I left the nursery door open, the crib parts scattered on the floor like the debris of a life that had exploded while I wasn't looking. The drive south on I-405 was a blur of gray asphalt and red taillights. The wipers slashed back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the deluge. I drove with the precision of a machine, keeping exactly to the speed limit, signaling every lane change. It was a way to maintain control when my internal world was spinning off its axis. I tried to rationalize. Architects solve problems. We take a chaotic set of requirements and restrictions, and we create order. I needed data. I needed to see the site conditions. Emily had told me she was an orphan from the Midwest. She had no family, which is why she clung so tightly to mine. We had met in a coffee shop 3 years ago. She was struggling with a heavy tray. I helped her. It was a cliché, a scene from a romantic film. She was a barista then, studying interior design. She was charming, vulnerable, and looked at me as if I were the anchor she had been searching for her whole life. I paid off her student loans when we got married. I sponsored her car. I built this life for us. I pulled off the highway and navigated through the grimier streets of the industrial district. Warehouses, auto repair shops, chain-link fences topped with razor wire. This was not Emily's world. She liked organic cotton and farmers markets. She was afraid of rough neighborhoods. The Blue Horizon Motel was a relic of the 60s, a U-shaped structure with peeling blue paint and a neon sign that buzzed with a dying flicker. The parking lot was half full of rusted sedans and work trucks. I parked my Tesla across the street in the lot of a shuttered diner. The car felt conspicuously sleek, a spaceship that had landed in a junkyard. I turned off the lights and waited. 10 minutes passed. The rain blurred the windshield. Then I saw her car. Her white SUV was parked near the back, almost hidden by a dumpster. My breath caught in my throat. Seeing the car made it real. Up until this moment, there was a chance, however slim, that the tablet was wrong, that it was a glitch. But there was her car. The door to room 104 opened. My wife stepped out. She was wearing her beige trench coat, belted loosely over her maternity dress. She looked around nervously, her head swiveling left and right. She didn't look like the woman who sang to our unborn child in the evenings. Her face was tight, her posture rigid. 2 men followed her out. They were not what I expected. When a man suspects his wife is cheating, he imagines a rival. Someone richer, better looking, or perhaps a younger fitness instructor. He imagines passion. These men wore work boots and paint-stained jeans. One was older, maybe 40, with a weathered face and heavy shoulders. The other was younger, in his 20s, thin and wiry. They didn't touch her with affection. They stood close to her, encroaching on her space. Emily opened her purse. She pulled out a thick white envelope. I watched, feeling as if I were underwater. The sound of my own pulse was deafening. She handed the envelope to the older man. He didn't smile. He opened it, thumbed through the contents, cash, and nodded. Then he said something to her. He pointed a finger at her chest. It looked aggressive. Emily flinched. She said something back, pleading. She placed a hand on her stomach, a gesture she used constantly at home to signal the fragility of her condition. The younger man laughed. It was a cruel, sharp movement of his head. He reached out and touched her hair. Not a caress. It was possessive, disrespectful. He tucked a strand behind her ear, and his hand lingered on her neck. She didn't pull away immediately. She endured it. Then, the older man handed her a piece of paper. She took it, unfolded it, read it quickly, and shoved it into her coat pocket. They exchanged a few more words. The older man patted her shoulder, a heavy, patronizing thud. Then they turned and walked back into room 104. Emily stood there for a moment in the rain. She looked defeated. She wiped her face, tears or rain, I couldn't tell, and hurried to her car. I slumped back in my seat. This wasn't a standard affair. This was business. This was leverage. I waited until her SUV pulled out of the lot and turned north, back toward our safe, sanitized life in Bellevue. I didn't follow her immediately. I sat in the dark car, listening to the rain. Who were they? Why was she paying them? And the text message. The application is stalled. A cold realization began to seep into my bones, chilling me more than the damp air. Emily's background, the orphan story, her evasiveness about her past, the rush to get married. I remember the day we filed for our marriage license. She had been shaking. I thought it was excitement. Now, replaying the memory, it looked like terror. I started the car. I didn't go home right away. I needed to think. I drove to a construction site. I was managing a high-rise in downtown Seattle. I parked in the underground garage and sat there for an hour, staring at the concrete wall. My life was a blueprint that had been tampered with. The dimensions were wrong. The materials were counterfeit. When I finally returned home, it was past 5. The house was warm and smelled of roasted chicken. The scene was aggressively normal. Emily was in the kitchen, wearing an apron over her dress. "Hey, honey," she called out as I entered. Her voice was bright, chirpy. "How was work? I didn't hear you coming earlier." She didn't know I had been there. She didn't know about the tablet. "Work was long," I said, hanging up my wet coat. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was beautiful. Her eyes were wide and innocent. But now I saw the tightness around her mouth, the slight tremor in her hands as she chopped vegetables. "How was yoga?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat and metallic. "Oh, it was great," she said, not looking up from the cutting board. "The instructor, Sarah, she showed us these breathing exercises for the 3rd trimester. I feel so much more relaxed." A lie. A fluid, effortless lie. She hadn't been to yoga. She had been in a motel with 2 men, handing over thousands of dollars of our money. "That's good," I said. "I'm glad you're relaxing." I walked into the living room. The tablet was still on the floor where I had left it. I picked it up. "Oh, you found my old iPad," Emily said, walking in with a glass of water. I thought I lost that ages ago. There was a flicker of panic in her eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Yeah," I said. "I knocked it over by accident. Screen's fine, though." I held it out to her. She took it, her fingers brushing mine. Her skin felt cold. It was dead, I lied. I couldn't get it to turn on. Her shoulders relaxed. Visible relief. "Oh well, it's ancient anyway. I should probably just recycle it." "Yeah," I said. "Probably." She went back to the kitchen. "Dinner in 10 minutes. I went upstairs to the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the faucet to mask any sound. My hands were shaking now. The adrenaline of the drive had faded, leaving behind a cold, calculating clarity. I checked my own phone. I opened a banking app. I had access to all our accounts, or so I thought. But if she was paying cash, she was withdrawing it somewhere. I scrolled through the last 3 months of transactions. Nothing large. No withdrawals of thousands of dollars. Where was she getting the money? Then I saw it. The credit card. We had a joint credit card for household emergencies. I rarely checked it because we barely used it. I paid the full balance automatically from my primary checking account every month. I opened the detailed statement. Cash advance. Cash advance. Cash advance. ATM withdrawals at casinos. Grocery stores where she requested cash back. Hundreds of small transactions that added up to thousands. And then a charge that made my blood run cold. DNA Diagnostic Center, Rush Service. It was dated 2 weeks ago. Why would she need a DNA test? We were married. Unless. I sat on the edge of the bathtub. The reflection in the mirror showed a man I didn't recognize. Pale, hollow-eyed. She wasn't just cheating. She was lying about everything. The money. The schedule. The pregnancy? No, she was definitely pregnant. But the paternity? And those men. They weren't just lovers. The dynamic I saw in the parking lot was about power. They held the cards. I thought about the text message again. The application. It clicked. The pieces of the structure slammed into place. She wasn't a citizen. I remembered the paperwork when we got married. She handled it all. She said she had a specialist. I just signed where she told me to sign. I was busy with a project. I trusted her. She told me she was born in Ohio, but I had never seen a birth certificate. I'd seen a passport, but I never looked closely. If she was undocumented, or if she was here under a false identity, and those men knew, then they owned her, and by extension, they were parasitizing me. I turned off the faucet. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to demand a divorce. Not yet. A divorce would mean splitting assets. It would mean alimony. If the child wasn't mine, I could fight it, but it would be messy. It would be a public humiliation. But if this was fraud, if this was a federal crime, I walked out of the bathroom. I went into the bedroom. Emily's purse was on the dresser. I could hear the sizzling of pans downstairs. I opened her purse. My hands moved with surgical precision. I found the wallet. I found a receipt for the DNA test hidden in a side pocket, crumpled up. I didn't steal it. I took a photo of it with my phone. Result: 0% probability of paternity. The subject name for the father wasn't Michael Anderson. It was Sample B. I felt a wave of nausea, but I swallowed it down. I put the receipt back exactly as I found it. I went further. The side pocket of the purse had a zipper. I opened it. Inside was a small, worn notebook. I opened it. It was a ledger. Dates and amounts. And names. M.I.C. $2,000. Legal fees, $500. New ID, $1,500. And a note scribbled in the margin. 3 more years. Stick to the plan. Act happy. Act happy. That was the directive. That was her role. And I was the audience. I closed the purse. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark, wet street. The love I had felt for her 3 hours ago was gone. It hadn't just faded. It had been excised. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. I was looking at a stranger who had broken into my house and was sleeping in my bed. She was using me as a ladder. She was climbing over my life to get to safety, and she didn't care if she broke my back in the process. Michael, dinner. Her voice floated up the stairs, sweet and melodic. I took a deep breath. I smoothed my shirt. I arranged my face into a mask of mild fatigue and domestic contentment. Coming, honey, I called back. I walked down the stairs. I wouldn't confront her. Not tonight. Confrontation allows the enemy to prepare defenses. I needed to know everything. I needed to know who M and C were. I needed to know her real name. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. I walked into the kitchen. She smiled at me and placed a plate of roasted chicken and vegetables on the table. I made your favorite, she said, touching my arm. It looks delicious, I said. I picked up my fork. I looked at the woman who was carrying another man's child, the woman who was funneling my money to criminals, the woman who viewed our marriage as a 3-year prison sentence. I smiled at her. Tell me about your day, I said softly. I want to hear every detail. She began to talk about yoga, about the breathing exercises, about how much the baby kicked. She spun a web of lies with the ease of a spider. I listened. I nodded. And in my mind, I began to draft a new blueprint. This wasn't a renovation project anymore. This was a demolition. And like any good architect, I knew that a controlled demolition requires careful planning. You have to weaken the supports one by one. You have to place the charges at the critical structural points. And then you stand back and watch it fall. You're so quiet tonight, she said, pausing in her story. Is everything okay? Everything is fine, I said, cutting into the chicken. I'm just thinking about the future. Me too. She beamed, rubbing her belly. It's going to be perfect. Yes, I agreed, my eyes cold and steady. It's going to be exactly what we deserve. I took a bite. The food tasted like ash, but I swallowed it. The investigation had begun, and I wouldn't stop until the foundation was stripped bare. The morning sun in Seattle does not burst. It seeps. It is a slow, gray diffusion of light that reveals the world in increments, stealing the shadows from the corners of the room until there is nowhere left to hide. I lay awake for hours before the dawn, rigid on my side of the bed, listening to the rhythm of Emily's breathing. Inhale, exhale, a soft, rhythmic sound that used to comfort me, to ground me like the hum of a well-tuned HVAC system in a completed building. Now, it sounded like a countdown. She slept on her side, a pillow tucked between her knees to support the weight of the pregnancy. Her hand rested protectively over the curve of her stomach. In the dim light, she looked ethereal, her hair fanned out across the white pillowcase like spilled ink. It was a picture of domestic tranquility, the kind of image that sells houses and insurance policies. But I knew now that it was just staging. It was furniture rented for an open house, designed to make an empty shell look like a home. I had to get up. I had to perform. The architect in me knew that when a structure is compromised, the most dangerous thing you can do is apply sudden stress. You do not run. You do not scream. You shore up the walls, you evacuate the occupants quietly, and then you condemn the building. I slid out of bed, moving with the silent precision of a thief in my own house. The floorboards, which I had installed myself 2 years ago, did not creak. I knew exactly where the joists were. I knew the anatomy of this house better than I knew the woman sleeping in it. In the bathroom, the mirror reflected a man who looked like a ghost. My skin was pallid, my eyes rimmed with the red exhaustion of a sleepless night spent processing the data I had gathered. The meeting at the motel, the cash, the men, the DNA receipt, the notification. I splashed cold water on my face, scrubbing hard, as if I could wash away the film of betrayal that felt like it was coating my skin. I dressed in my work clothes, a charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt. Armor. I needed the structure of the collar, the tightness of the tie. It held me together. When I went downstairs, the house was silent. The kitchen was pristine. I started the coffee maker, the gurgle of the machine breaking the stillness. While it brewed, I stood by the sliding glass door and looked out at the backyard. The grass was wet with dew. The fence I had built last summer stood straight and true. Why was it so easy to build things with wood and stone, and so impossible to build something real with a person? Michael. Her voice came from the stairs, sleepy and warm. I froze. My heart hammered a warning against my ribs. "Good morning," I said. I turned. I forced the muscles of my face into a smile. It felt tight, brittle like plaster that hadn't cured properly. Emily shuffled into the kitchen, wearing her oversized robe. She looked soft, vulnerable. She came to me and wrapped her arms around my waist, resting her head on my chest. I felt the pressure of her stomach against me. The child that the piece of paper in her purse said had a 0% probability of being mine. I had to hug her back. I had to. If I pulled away, the facade would crack. I lifted my arms and placed them lightly on her back. I felt the heat of her skin through the fabric. It made me feel nauseous. "You're up early," she mumbled into my shirt. "Big project meeting," I lied. The lies came easier today. Perhaps deceit is contagious. "We're pouring the foundation for the Westlake Tower. I need to be there for the inspection." She pulled back and looked up at me. Her eyes were clear, blue, and utterly devoid of guilt. That was what terrified me the most. If she had looked anxious, if she had looked shameful, I might have understood. But she looked at me with the serene confidence of a woman who believes her script is perfect. "You work too hard," she said, reaching up to straighten my tie. Her fingers brushed my neck. I fought the urge to flinch. "Don't forget, we have the ultrasound on Friday. You promised you'd come." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. "I love you, Michael." The words hung in the air between us. Structural loads. Some beams can take the weight, others buckle. This phrase, which once supported my entire world, now felt like a heavy stone dropped on a glass floor. "I'll see you tonight," I said. I couldn't say it back. I couldn't give her that. It was the one piece of structural integrity I had left. I grabbed my coffee and walked out the door. The moment the cool air of the garage hit my face, I exhaled a breath I felt I had been holding for 12 hours. I got into my car, backed out, and drove down the street. But I didn't go to the Westlake site. I drove 3 blocks, turned a corner, and parked in a spot where I could see the entrance to our subdivision but remain unseen. I took out my phone. I opened the app connected to our home security system. I had installed the system myself. Cameras on the exterior, sensors on the windows. But the interior was blind. We had agreed on it, privacy. No cameras inside the house. I had respected that. I had respected her. Now, that respect was a vulnerability in the system. I needed eyes. I needed ears. I waited. At 9:15 a.m., the garage door opened. Emily's white SUV pulled out. She turned left, heading toward the highway. I waited another 5 minutes to be sure she wasn't coming back for a forgotten phone or purse. Then, I drove back to the house. I entered through the garage. The house was empty again, but it felt different now. It felt like a crime scene that hadn't been taped off yet. I carried a bag I had retrieved from my office storage unit earlier that morning. In my line of work, we sometimes use specialized equipment to monitor noise levels and acoustic properties in buildings. High-fidelity audio recorders. Small, discreet, powerful. I started in the kitchen. It was the hub of the home. The island was where she made her phone calls while cooking. I pulled the refrigerator out from the wall, just an inch. I taped a small, black recorder to the back of the unit, near the top, where the compressor hum wouldn't mask the voices. It was voice-activated. It would capture anything said in the room. Next, the living room. I placed the device inside the hollow cavity of the curtain rod finial. It was a tight fit, but I unscrewed the end cap, slid the slim recorder in, and replaced the cap. Invisible. Then, the bedroom. This was harder. I felt like a violator walking into our shared sanctuary with intent to spy. But then I remembered the motel. I remembered the man touching her hair. The violation had already occurred. I was just documenting the damage. I placed the device under the nightstand, taping it to the underside of the bottom drawer. Finally, the nursery. I stood in the center of the room. The sage green walls mocked me. The disassembled crib lay on the floor. I didn't want to put a bug in here. This was supposed to be a pure place. But she would be in here. She would talk to the baby. She might talk to him. I placed a baby monitor on the shelf, a new one I had bought, still in the box. I set it up, linking it to a secure frequency that only my receiver could pick up, not the standard Wi-Fi that she could access. It looked like a thoughtful gift I had just unboxed. I checked the time. 10:30 a.m. I had to leave. I sat in my car in a parking lot downtown, staring at a laptop screen. I wasn't working on blueprints. I was looking at the cloud account again. I had managed to recover a backup of her messages from a month ago before she had cleared them. The contact M was Mateo. The contact C was Carlos. I began to read. Mateo, we need the cash for the lawyer. My brother is in trouble. Emily, I can't get that much out without him noticing. He checks the main account. Mateo, make him notice something else then. Or we send the photos to his office. Blackmail. It looked like blackmail. But then I read further down. Emily, don't threaten me, Mateo. We are in this together. Once the papers come through, we split the equity. You get your cut. Just be patient. This idiot is building us a retirement fund. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. This idiot. It wasn't simple extortion. It was a partnership. She wasn't a victim. She was a shareholder in the enterprise of ruining my life. She was managing me like a project, keeping the client happy until the final invoice was paid. I closed the laptop. The rage was cold, liquid nitrogen in my veins. I wanted to drive home, throw the laptop at her, and scream. But I couldn't. The architect doesn't smash the faulty pillar. He condemns it with a signature on a piece of paper. I needed the paperwork. The digital trail was good, but courts love paper. Immigration services love paper. I needed the document I saw in the photo. The passport. The real one. I went back to work for the afternoon. I sat in meetings, nodded at structural engineers, discussed tensile strength and wind shear. I was functioning on a separate plane of existence. My voice was steady, my answers correct, but my mind was miles away, rotating a 3D model of my house, looking for the hiding place. Where do you hide the truth? In a shoebox on the top shelf? Too cliché. Under the mattress? Too risky. Emily was organized. She liked containers. She liked things to be labeled. I remember a metal lockbox she kept. She said it was for keepsakes. Her grandmother's jewelry. Old letters. She kept the key on her keychain. I went home at 5:30 p.m. Emily was in the living room, watching a reality show about house hunters. The irony was palpable. Hey, she said. She didn't get up this time. She looked tired. How was the foundation? Solid, I said. We poured the concrete. Now we just have to wait for it to cure. That's boring, she laughed. It's the most important part, I said quietly. If it cures too fast, it cracks. I went to the kitchen to get water. I checked the recorder behind the fridge. It was still there, the tiny red light blinking once to indicate it was active. It had recorded something. "I'm going to take a shower," I announced. "Okay, dinner's in an hour. We're having pasta." I went upstairs. I went into the bedroom. Her keys were on the dresser. I took the small silver key from her ring. I moved to the closet. The lockbox was on the top shelf, buried behind a stack of winter sweaters. I pulled it down. It was heavy. My heart was racing again. I listened for her footsteps on the stairs. The TV volume was up. She was distracted. I sat on the floor of the closet, hidden by the hanging clothes, and inserted the key. It turned with a smooth click. I opened the lid. There was no jewelry, no letters from a grandmother. There was a stack of identification cards. I picked up the first one, a driver's license from Florida. The photo was Emily, but the hair was darker, shorter. The name was Elena Rodriguez. I picked up the next one, a social security card. It looked real, but the texture of the paper felt slightly off to my touch. Then, the passport, a Venezuelan passport. I opened it. The photo was her. The name, Elena Maria Rodriguez. Date of birth, 2 years earlier than she had told me. I flipped to the visa page. It was a tourist visa. Expiration date, 4 years ago. She was an overstay. She was undocumented. But there was more. Beneath the passport was a thick envelope. I opened it. It contained legal documents from a court in Miami. State of Florida versus Elena Rodriguez. Charge, grand theft, fraudulent practices. The case had been dismissed. Or rather, the defendant had failed to appear. There was a bench warrant. She wasn't just undocumented. She was a fugitive. She had run from Florida, come to Seattle, reinvented herself as Emily the orphan from Midwest, and found a target. Me. I looked at the dates. The theft charge was from 5 years ago. She had been running for a while. And then, at the bottom of the box, a photograph. It was a picture of her and the 2 men, Mateo and Carlos. They were younger, tanned, smiling. They were standing on a beach. Her arms were around both of them. She looked happy, truly happy. Not the soft, curated happiness she displayed for me, but a wild, raw joy. On the back of the photo, in messy handwriting, familia, forever, family. They weren't just partners. They were her family. Maybe not by blood, but by bond. And I was the outsider. I was the mark. I quickly photographed every document with my phone. The resolution was high. Every letter, every stamp was captured. I needed these for the file I was building. This was the evidence of moral turpitude. This was the evidence of identity fraud. This was the key to the eviction. I put everything back exactly as it was. I locked the box. I put it back on the shelf behind the sweaters. I returned the key to her ring on the dresser. I went into the bathroom and turned on the shower. I stood under the spray, fully clothed for a moment, letting the water soak my shirt. I didn't care. I needed to wash the feeling of the paper from my fingers. When I came downstairs later, dried and changed, Emily was draining the pasta. "You took a long time," she said. "Just needed to decompress," I said. We ate in silence for a while. I listened to the scrape of forks against porcelain. So, I started testing the waters. I was thinking about booking a trip. For our anniversary. Before the baby comes. A baby moon. She froze mid-chew. "Oh, where?" I was thinking maybe Mexico, or the Caribbean. Somewhere warm. Panic flitted across her face. If she left the country, she wouldn't be able to come back. Not with an expired visa and a pending status adjustment. If she left, the game was over. "I don't know, Michael," she said quickly. "With the pregnancy. The doctor said I shouldn't fly too far. And Zika virus. Isn't that still a thing? I think we should stay here. Maybe a staycation?" "You're right," I said, watching her squirm. "Safety first." "Exactly," she smiled, relieved. "We have everything we need right here." After dinner, she went to take a bath. I cleared the table. Once the water was running upstairs, I retrieved the recorder from behind the fridge. I plugged it into my phone using an adapter. I scrolled to the timestamp from earlier in the day, around 11 a.m. The audio was clear. The hum of the fridge was a low drone, but the voices were sharp. Sound of a door opening. Footsteps. Emily's voice. "He's gone. It's safe." Male voice. "Mateo, did you find the bank statements?" "Emily, I told you he's gone paperless." I I can't get the passwords without him knowing. He's paranoid about security. Mateo, we need the money, Elena. The guys in Miami are getting impatient. If they find us here, Emily, they won't find us. Ing burin Elena. She doesn't exist. I'm Mrs. Anderson now. Just a few more months. Once the kid is born, he can't kick me out. The courts will never separate a mother from a citizen child. I'll have leverage. Mateo, and the gringo? Does he suspect? Emily laughs. It was a cold, harsh sound. Michael? He lives in a fantasy world. He thinks he's building a family. He's building a cage, and he doesn't even know he's on the outside. He's soft, Mateo. He's weak. He'll do whatever I say to protect the baby. Mateo, make sure he does, because if this goes south, we disappear, and you're on your own. Emily, it won't go south. I have him wrapped around my finger. I stopped the recording. Soft. Weak. I looked at my reflection in the dark window of the kitchen. I didn't look soft. I looked like stone. She was right about one thing. I was building a cage, but she was wrong about who was going to be inside it. I needed to secure the perimeter. I needed to make sure that when the collapse happened, the debris fell exactly where I wanted it to. I went to my study. I opened my safe. I took out my own passport, my birth certificate, the deed to the house. I put them in a waterproof bag. I was securing my assets. Then I sat down at my desk and opened a new file on my computer. I named it Project Demolition. I began to type. I transcribed the recording. I listed the document numbers from the photos I had taken. I created a timeline of her lies. I needed one more thing. I needed to connect Mateo and Carlos to something tangible, something that would interest the authorities more than just an overstayed visa. She had mentioned guys in Miami. She had mentioned her brother being in trouble. I opened a browser and started searching for the names I had heard on the tape, cross-referencing them with Florida criminal records. It took hours. The digital world is a vast haystack, but I had the needle, Elena Rodriguez. I found a connection. A news article from 4 years ago. A bust in Miami involving a ring of identity thieves who targeted elderly people. They stole retirement funds. The ringleader was a man named Mateo Vasquez. He had evaded capture. I looked at the photo in the article. It was him, the man from the motel. And see, Carlos, likely a foot soldier. They weren't just hiding. They were active. And if they were pressing Emily for money, it meant they were trying to restart their operations here. In Seattle, using my money, I was funding a criminal enterprise. The realization made me feel sick, but also gave me power. This wasn't just a domestic dispute anymore. This was a matter of national security, or at least federal interest. I had enough. I had enough to bury them. But the timing had to be perfect. If I went to the police now, they might arrest her, but the process would be slow. She might get bail. She might run. I needed the agency that didn't play by the slow rules of local police. I needed the agency that could detain and remove. ICE. But I couldn't just call a tip line. I needed a direct strike. I needed them to be caught in the act of something undeniable. I went back to the recording. Mateo, bring the cash or we talk to him. I had an idea. A terrible, brilliant idea. I would give them what they wanted. I would make myself the bait. I went upstairs. Emily was asleep. The bath had relaxed her. She looked angelic again. The mask was back in place. I lay down next to her. I stared at the ceiling. I thought about the baby, the innocent life growing inside a lie. It wasn't mine. Biology dictated that. But I had felt it kick. I had painted the room. A pang of grief hit me, sharp and sudden. I was mourning a child who hadn't died, but who had never existed. The child I thought was mine was a phantom. The reality was a stranger's offspring, a tool for leverage. I had to detach. I had to sever the emotional rebar. I turned on my side, away from her. Tomorrow, I would start the next phase. I would visit the lawyer. I would finalize the strategy. But first, I needed to sleep. I needed my strength. As I closed my eyes, I heard her murmur in her sleep. A name. Mateo. It was a whisper, barely a breath. But it was louder than a scream in the silent room. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I simply lay there, letting the darkness swallow the room, waiting for the dawn to bring the light I needed to burn it all down. The foundation was sand. The walls were rot. The roof was leaking. It was time to call the wrecking ball. In architecture, we learn early on that gravity is a relentless adversary. It pulls everything downward, seeking the path of least resistance to bring a structure to its knees. To build something that lasts, you do not ignore gravity. You respect it, you calculate it, and you create a system that transfers the load safely to the ground. The law, I was beginning to realize, operates on a similar principle. It is a crushing weight, a force that can flatten a man if he stands directly beneath it, or one that can be channeled to reinforce his position if he knows where to place the beams. My marriage was no longer a home. It was a condemned property. And I was no longer a husband. I was a litigant preparing for a trial that had not yet been scheduled. I parked my car in the underground garage of a steel and glass tower in downtown Seattle, a building I had once admired for its brutalist efficiency. Now it just looked cold. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The office of Sterling and Associates was quiet, smelling of expensive leather and old paper. This was not a family law practice with soft lighting and tissues on the table. This was a firm that handled corporate litigation and high-stakes immigration defense. I wasn't here to mediate. I was here to amputate. Mr. Sterling was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He was older, perhaps 60, with eyes that had seen every variation of human deceit. He didn't offer me coffee. He sat behind a desk that was wide enough to land a plane on, and he listened. I laid out for him. Not the emotional story. He didn't care about my broken heart. I laid out the structural failures, the false identity, the expired visa, the secret payments, the men, the pregnancy that defied the timeline of my presence. I placed a tablet on his desk, showing him the photos of the documents I had found in Emily's lockbox, the Venezuelan passport, the Florida court docket. Sterling put on his reading glasses. He studied the images in silence for a long time. The only sound in the room was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, marking the seconds of my life that were slipping away. "You have a problem, Mr. Anderson," Sterling said finally, removing his glasses. His voice was gravelly, devoid of sympathy. "And it is not the problem you think you have. She committed fraud," I said. "I want an annulment. I want her out of my house." "Fraud is difficult to prove in family court," Sterling said. "It becomes a he said, she said scenario. She will claim you knew. She will claim you married her to help her, and now you are vindictive because the marriage soured. The courts generally default to divorce, not annulment. And in Washington state, assets are split community property." "I don't care about the money," I lied. "I did care. It was my life's work." "You should," Sterling countered. "But that is not the big problem. The big problem is the I-864. I frowned. "The what?" "The affidavit of support," he said, pulling a file from his drawer. "When you sponsor her for her adjustment of status, her green card, you signed a contract with the United States government. For my 864. He slid a blank copy across the desk. I recognized the layout. I remembered signing it amidst a stack of other papers Emily had put in front of me, smiling, telling me it was just standard procedure. "This document," Sterling tapped the paper with a heavy finger, "states that you agree to financially support the beneficiary, your wife, at 125% of the poverty line. This obligation does not end with divorce." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What?" "You are listening, but you are not hearing," Sterling said sharply. "You could divorce her tomorrow. You can catch her with 10 men. It does not matter. Under federal law, you are financially responsible for her until she becomes a U.S. citizen, or until she dies, or until she leaves the country permanently. If she collects food stamps, the government sends you the bill. If she needs housing assistance, you pay. This contract overrides a prenuptial agreement. It overrides a divorce decree. You are her sponsor. You are her financial guarantor. For life, or until the status changes." I sat back, stunned. The trap was far more sophisticated than I had imagined. It wasn't just about half the house. It was about an indentured servitude. She could leave me, live with Mateo, and I would still be paying for her groceries, her rent, her existence. "She played you, Mr. Anderson," Sterling said, his voice flat. "She secured an insurance policy. If you divorce her, she stays in the country, and you pay. If you stay married, she gets citizenship in 3 years, and then she takes half your assets. It is a win-win for her. How do I break it? I asked. My voice was a whisper. You don't break the contract, Sterling said. You remove the beneficiary. He leaned forward. If she is deported, the obligation ends. If she is found to have obtained the status through fraud, the status is revoked. The I-864 becomes void because the underlying premise, a valid path to residency, was false. He looked at the photo of the Venezuelan passport again. You say she is using a false identity? Yes. She's living as Emily Anderson, but she is Elena Rodriguez, a fugitive from Florida. Sterling's eyes narrowed. A spark of interest appeared. Now, that is leverage. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, is a bureaucratic machine. They are slow. They are underfunded. They prioritize. A simple marriage fraud case? It sits in a pile for years. But a fugitive? Someone with an active warrant hiding under a false identity? Someone connected to a criminal ring? He handed the tablet back to me. Do not file for divorce yet, he commanded. If you file, she gets alerted. She gets a lawyer. She claims abuse. She plays the victim card. The system is designed to protect vulnerable women, and she knows how to use that shield. So what do? You build the case for the government, Sterling said. You do their job for them. You hand them a package so complete, so undeniable, that they have no choice but to act. And you need to make sure that when they come for her, she is right where they can find her. And, preferably, in the company of the people who prove her criminal associations. He stood up. The meeting was over. One more thing, Mr. Anderson, Sterling said as I reached the door. You are an architect. You know that when you demolish a building, you must cut the power lines first. If you strike while the current is live, you will electrocute yourself. Be careful. She is desperate. Desperate people are dangerous. I left the office with a new understanding of the physics of my situation. I was standing under a suspended piano, and the rope was fraying. I couldn't just untie it. I had to guide the fall. The next 3 days were a blur of clandestine activity. I was living a double life. By day, I went to work, reviewed blueprints, and managed contractors. By night, I was an investigator. I bought a high-speed scanner and kept it in the trunk of my car. On Wednesday, when Emily went for a massage, another lie, another meeting with her handlers, I rushed home. I raided the filing cabinet. I raided the lockbox again. I scanned everything. Old credit card applications. The lease agreement for her old apartment she claimed to have lost. I found a box of old phones in the garage. I managed to charge one up. It wasn't passcode. It contained photos from 5 years ago. Photos of her in Miami. Photos of her with stacks of cash. Photos of her holding a gun, posing like a gangster's mall. I compiled it all into a digital dossier. I called it the Foundation. I wrote a cover letter. It was clinical, precise, devoid of emotion. To Department of Homeland Security /IC investigation subject. Credible information regarding fugitive Elena Maria Rodriguez, alias Emily Anderson, an associated criminal enterprise. I detailed the locations. I detailed the false identity. I cross-referenced the Florida warrant numbers I had found online. I attached the photos of Mateo and Carlos, identifying them as potential accomplices in an ongoing extortion scheme. I didn't send it yet. I needed the timing to be perfect. Friday arrived, the day of the ultrasound. The waiting room of the clinic was painted in cheerful pastels. Ducks and bunnies adorned the walls. Couples sat holding hands, whispering excitedly. I sat next to Emily, scrolling through emails on my phone, maintaining a distance of exactly 6 inches between our thighs. I'm so nervous, she whispered, reaching for my hand. I let her take it. Her palm was sweaty. Was she nervous about the baby's health? Or was she nervous that the technician would see something, some genetic marker, that would betray her secret? It'll be fine, I said. My voice was robotic. Inside the exam room, the lights were dimmed. The technician applied the cold gel to Emily's stomach. I watched the screen. The static cleared, resolving into the gray, grainy image of a spine, a skull, tiny limbs. There's the heartbeat, the technician said, turning up the volume. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A strong, rapid rhythm. Emily started to cry. Oh, Michael. Look. I looked. I felt a profound, hollow sadness. That was a life, a human being. It wasn't the baby's fault. It wasn't the baby's sin. But I couldn't separate the child from the lie. That heartbeat was fueled by deception. That spine was being built with minerals bought with my stolen money. He's perfect, the technician said. It's a boy. A boy. Emily sobbed. We're having a son. She looked at me, her eyes shining with tears. For a split second, I wondered if she believed her own con. Did she truly think we could just ignore the reality? Did she think that if she cried hard enough, the biological facts would change? A son, I repeated. I wasn't looking at the screen anymore. I was looking at her neck. I saw the faint pulse of her jugular vein. I thought about the recording. He's a ticket. He's soft. We have to celebrate, she said as we wiped the gel off. The baby shower is tomorrow. It's going to be perfect. The baby shower. The culmination of the performance. Saturday. The house was transformed. Blue balloons. Blue streamers. A banner that said, "Welcome, baby Anderson." Our friends arrived at noon. Colleagues from my firm. Her friends from the yoga class. Women she barely knew, but had cultivated to create the illusion of a social circle. The house filled with chatter and the clinking of glasses. I moved through the crowd like a specter. I accepted handshakes. Congratulations, Mike. You must be thrilled. He's going to be a linebacker with those jeans. I smiled until my jaw ached. Thank you. Yes, we're very blessed. I watched Emily. She was in her element. She wore a flowing white dress that emphasized her pregnancy. She was radiant, holding court in the center of the living room, opening gifts. Oh, look at these tiny shoes. A diaper genie. You guys are lifesavers. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Every laugh, every tear was calibrated. She was building a shield of witnesses. Look how happy we are. Look how real this is. I retreated to the kitchen to refill the ice bucket. The noise of the party felt distant, muffled by the glass walls of my dissociation. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A blocked number. I stepped into the pantry and closed the door. Hello, Mr. Anderson. The voice was dry, authoritative. This is Agent Miller, ICE, Seattle Field Office. We received your digital packet. My heart stopped, then restarted with a violent thud. I had sent the email late last night, using a secure, anonymous server, but I had included my contact info as a cooperating witness. Yes, I said. This is substantial, Agent Miller said. We've been looking for Mateo Vasquez for 3 years. We had cold trails in Miami and Chicago. You're telling me he's in King County? He's here, I said. He's extorting my wife. He's part of the fraud. And the woman? The subject claiming to be your wife? Elena Rodriguez, I said. The name felt strange on my tongue. Yes. We need to verify the location of the male subjects, Miller said. We don't want to chase. We want a containment. If we move on the house, is there a risk of hostages? No, I said quickly. I can control the environment, but I need them to be there, together. If you can confirm they will be at a specific location at a specific time, we can execute the warrant, Miller said. But Mr. Anderson, once we initiate, there is no calling it off. This is a federal operation. I understand, I said. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Why tomorrow? Because I'm hiring them, I said. To fix my roof. Understood. We will have units in position. Do not engage them. Do not let on that you know. Just open the door. I will. The line clicked dead. I stood in the pantry for a moment, breathing in the smell of dried spices and cereal. It was done. The demolition charges were set. The fuse was lit. I walked back out into the party. Emily was holding up a onesie that said Daddy's Little Helper. Michael, she called out, waving me over. Come look. Isn't it adorable? I walked over to her. The room went quiet. Everyone was looking at the happy couple. It's great, I said. Speech. Speech. Someone shouted. It was Dave, one of the engineers from my office. He was a good guy, clueless. The chant grew. Speech. Speech. Emily looked up at me, beaming. She handed me her glass of sparkling cider. I raised a glass. I looked around the room. I saw the faces of people who trusted me, people who respected me. And I saw her, the architect of my ruin. To foundations, I began. My voice was steady, projecting clearly to the back of the room. In my line of work, We talk a lot about what lies beneath, what holds everything up. The room was silent. We build beautiful facades, I continued, looking directly into Emily's eyes. We use glass and steel to catch the light. But it doesn't matter how beautiful the building is if the ground beneath it is shifting. Today, we celebrate a new life, a new addition, and we celebrate the truth that brought us here. Emily's smile faltered slightly. She sensed a frequency shift in my voice, a dissonance that only she could hear. To Emily, I said, raising the glass higher, for everything she has done to make this life possible, for the sacrifices, for the history she has overcome, and to the future, may be exactly what we have built. To the future, the guests chorused. Emily drank, but her eyes remained locked on mine. She was trying to read me, scanning my face for cracks. I gave her nothing but smooth, polished marble. The party wound down around 5 p.m. The guests left, leaving behind mountains of wrapping paper and half-eaten cake. Emily collapsed onto the sofa, rubbing her feet. That was amazing, she sighed. Did you see how much stuff we got? We won't have to buy diapers for a month. It was a success, I agreed. I started gathering trash bags. Michael, she said, about the roof. I paused. I had planted the seed earlier in the week, complaining about a leak in the garage. Yeah? I was thinking, she said, trying to sound casual. You know those guys I hired to move some furniture for my friend? The ones I helped out? They do handiwork. They're cheap, and they really need the money. Mateo and Carlos. She was trying to funnel more money to them. She was walking right into the trap. I don't know him, I said, feigning reluctance. I usually use licensed contractors. Please, she pleaded. They're desperate, and they work on Sundays. You want the garage fixed before the baby comes, right? It's just a patch job. I pretended to think about it. I scratched my chin. I let out a sigh. Fine, I said, if it helps them out. Tell them to be here tomorrow at 9 sharp. I'll pay cash. Her face lit up. Relief. Greed. You're the best. I'll text them right now. She grabbed her phone. I watched her thumbs fly across the screen. She wasn't texting a contractor. She was texting her co-conspirator. The idiot agreed. Come tomorrow. Cash job. They're available, she said a moment later. Great, I said. Tell them to bring their own tools. I finished cleaning up. I took the trash out to the bins in the alley. The air was crisp and cold. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and black. I looked at the house. From the outside, it glowed with warmth. Inside, the blue balloons were slowly losing their helium, drooping toward the floor. I went back inside. I'm going to turn in early, I told her. I have a headache. Okay, she said. I'm going to sort through the baby clothes. I want to wash them. Good night, Emily. Good night, Michael. I went upstairs to the guest room. I had been sleeping there for back pain the last 2 nights. I lay on the bed, fully dressed. I couldn't sleep. I stared at the digital clock. 2100 hours, 2200 hours, 2300 hours. At midnight, I heard her come up the stairs. She paused outside my door. I held my breath. Then she continued to the master bedroom. I got up and opened my laptop. I checked the email one last time. Operation status, pending. I closed the laptop. Tomorrow, the facade would fall. Tomorrow, the walls would come down. I felt a strange sense of calm. It was the calm of a surgeon before the first cut. It was going to be messy. There would be blood, metaphorically. There would be screaming. But the tumor had to come out. I thought about the lawyer's words. Remove the beneficiary. I wasn't just removing a beneficiary. I was exorcising a ghost. I looked out the window at the driveway. In 9 hours, that asphalt would be a staging ground for federal agents. I whispered to the empty room. Welcome to the job site, gentlemen. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I simply waited for the sun to rise on the wreckage of my life. The demolition was scheduled, and I was the one holding the detonator. The physics of a collapse are governed by a simple, brutal mathematics. Every structure has a breaking point, a specific load limit beyond which the integrity of the materials fails. In a controlled demolition, the goal is not to create chaos, but to guide the failure. You weaken the supports in a specific sequence so that the building falls inward upon its own footprint, minimizing the damage to the surrounding environment. It is an act of violent precision. Sunday morning arrived with a deceptive stillness. The sky over Bellevue was a sheet of unpolished aluminum, flat and gray, trapping the damp air against the ground. I stood at the kitchen window at 7 a.m., holding a mug of black coffee that had long since gone cold. I was watching the street. The suburban silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional caw of a crow or the distant hum of a lawnmower. To anyone else, it was just another lazy weekend morning. To me, it was the pause before the detonator clicked. Emily came down at 7:30. She was wearing a loose floral maternity dress, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She looked soft, sleepy, and utterly non-threatening. It was a testament to her skill as an actress that even now, knowing everything I knew, the false name, the criminal record, the paternity fraud, I still felt a phantom twinge of the affection I had once held for her. It was a muscle memory of the heart, a reflex I had to suppress with cold logic. "Morning, Michael," she said, yawning and rubbing her belly. "Did you sleep? You were tossing and turning." "I slept enough," I lied. My voice was calm, steady. It was the voice of a project manager briefing a client. "The roof guys should be here around 9, right?" She brightened instantly. "Yes." I texted Mateo. "They're bringing a truck. They said they can do the whole patch in a few hours." She moved to the coffee maker, her back to me. I watched her. She was humming a tune. She was happy. She thought she had won. In her mind, today was payday. She would get cash from me to pay the contractors, funnel it to her partners, and secure her leverage for another few months until the baby, her anchor, was born. She was playing checkers while I was rearranging the chessboard. "I need to go unlock the side gate," I said, "and I want to move the Tesla out of the driveway. I want them to have clear access to the garage roof." "That's thoughtful of you," she said, turning to smile at me. "You're always so practical." I walked out the front door. The air was crisp, smelling of wet cedar and exhaust. I got into my car and backed it out, parking on the street, 3 houses down. This was strategic. I wanted the driveway empty. I wanted a kill box, a clear, unobstructed zone where there would be nowhere to run. I walked back up the driveway. I unlocked the tall wooden gate that led to the backyard. I checked the latch. It was well oiled. I left it slightly ajar. Then I went to the garage and opened the main door. I set out a ladder. I placed a stack of cash, $500 in 20s, on the workbench, visible but not reachable from the outside. The bait. At 8:45 a.m., I received a text message. It wasn't from Emily. It was a single character from an unknown number. P. Position. I didn't reply. I put the phone in my pocket. I stood in the center of the driveway, looking like a suburban husband waiting for a service call. I checked my watch. The sweep of the second hand felt agonizingly slow. At 8:58 a.m., a truck turned the corner. It was a battered Ford F-150, the paint peeling, the bed filled with miscellaneous debris, ladders, buckets, tarps. It didn't look like a contractor's vehicle. It looked like a getaway car that had seen better days. It rumbled up the street, the muffler sputtering a loud, aggressive cough, disrupting the Sunday quiet. The truck pulled into my driveway. The engine died with a shudder. 2 men stepped out. I recognized them instantly from the photos in the file and the glimpse at the motel. Mateo was the driver. He was shorter than me, but broad, with a thickness to his neck and shoulders that suggested manual labor and gym fights. He wore a tight t-shirt and work boots. His eyes were dark, scanning the perimeter immediately. He didn't look at me. He looked at the windows of the houses next door. Carlos was the passenger. Younger, wiry, with a nervous energy. He was chewing gum rapidly. He wore a baseball cap pulled low. I stepped forward, putting on my mask of the naive, grateful homeowner. "Hi," I said, extending a hand. "You must be the guys Emily called." "I'm Michael." Mateo looked at my hand, then at my face. He smirked, a predatory, dismissive curling of the lip. He shook my hand briefly. His grip was hard a challenge. "Yeah," Mateo said. His accent was thick, but his English was functional. "We here for the roof." "Great," I said. "I appreciate you coming on Sunday. My wife said you guys did good work for a friend." "Yeah, we do good work," Carlos said, snickering. He was looking at the garage. "Where's the leak?" "I'll show you," I said. I led them toward the ladder I had set up. As we walked, The front door of the house opened. Emily stepped out. She put on makeup. She stood on the porch, hand on her hip, playing the role of the supervising mistress of the house. "Hey guys," she called out. "Thanks for coming." Mateo looked up at her. For a second, the mask slipped. There was a familiarity in his gaze, an ownership that went beyond employer and employee. "Hola, Mrs. Anderson," Mateo said, emphasizing the last name with a mockery that only the three of them understood. "We fix up good for you." I stood between the men and my wife. I was the fulcrum. "Come take a look up here," I said to Mateo, gesturing to the ladder. "I think the flashing is loose." Mateo spat on the driveway and started to climb the ladder. Carlos stayed on the ground, kicking at a loose stone, his eyes darting around. Emily walked down the steps. She came to stand next to me. She was too close to the blast zone, but I needed her there. I needed the frame to be complete. "Is it bad?" she asked me, feigning concern about the roof. "I think it's structural," I said, looking at her. "The rot goes deeper than I thought." She frowned, not understanding the double meaning. "Well, hopefully they can patch it." Mateo reached the roofline. He stood up on the shingles, looking down at us. He was the king of the castle. He looked at Emily and rubbed his thumb against his fingers, the universal sign for money. Emily looked at me. "Michael, do you have a cash? They probably want half up front for materials." I patted my pocket. "I have it in the garage," I said. "Let me just explain to Mateo what I want done." I took a step back, moving slightly away from Emily and Carlos, creating a triangle. "Carlos," I said, "can you grab that other ladder from the truck? We might need 2 access points." Carlos grunted and turned back toward their truck. The stage was set. Mateo on the roof. Carlos by the truck. Emily in the middle of the driveway. Me, stepping toward the garage. 9:05 a.m. I didn't hear them coming. I felt them. The vibration of heavy vehicles moving fast. From both ends of the street, black SUVs surged forward. They didn't use sirens. They didn't screech tires. They moved with the terrifying, silent velocity of sharks in deep water. 2 SUVs blocked the end of the driveway. 2 more sealed the street. The doors flew open before the vehicles even came to a complete stop. Men and women in tactical vests poured out. On the back of their jackets, in bold yellow letters, "IC, Federal Agent." The silence of the morning shattered. "Police. Federal agents. Don't move." The command was a wall of sound. It wasn't a request. It was a physical force. Carlos, who was reaching into the bed of the truck, froze. He looked up, eyes wide with terror. He dropped the ladder. It clattered loudly on the asphalt. "Hands! Show me your hands." 3 agents were on Carlos in seconds. He was slammed against the side of the truck. I heard the air leave his lungs. On the roof, Mateo panicked. He scrambled backward, slipping on the damp shingles. "Stay where you are. Get down." An agent pointed a rifle at the roof. Not a sniper rifle, but a tactical carbine. The threat was absolute. Mateo raised his hands slowly. He looked down at the driveway, trapped. There was no escape. The drop was too high, and the ground was swarming with law enforcement. And Emily, my wife, stood frozen in the center of the driveway. Her hands were over her mouth. She wasn't looking at the agents. She was looking at me. Her face was a mask of pure confusion. She couldn't process the sudden shift in reality. In her world, I was the fool, the unsuspecting husband. This level of force, this coordination, it didn't fit the narrative she had written. "Michael?" she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "Michael, what's happening?" I didn't answer. I took a step back, leaning against the garage door frame. I crossed my arms. I watched. An agent with a shaved head and a stern, weathered face, Agent Miller, marched up the driveway. He ignored me. He walked straight to Emily. "Ma'am, step aside," he ordered, but he didn't wait for her to comply. He signaled to 2 female agents. They approached her. Emily regained her voice. "Wait, what are you doing?" They're just fixing my roof. I'm an American citizen's wife. You can't be here." She tried to play the card. The shield she thought was invincible. Agent Miller stopped. He looked at her. He held up a tablet. "Elena Maria Rodriguez?" he asked. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. Emily stopped breathing. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin the color of old parchment. "No," she stammered. "I'm Emily Anderson. This is my husband. Michael, tell them." She reached out to me. Her hand was shaking violently. I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had married, the woman carrying a child, the woman who had sold me out for a green card and cash. I said nothing. My silence was the verdict. Miller nodded to the female agents. "Secure her." They grabbed her arms. "No," Emily screamed. A high, piercing shriek that tore through the neighborhood. "I am pregnant. You can't touch me. Michael, help me." One of the agents spoke calmly but firmly. "Ms. Rodriguez, we have a warrant for your arrest regarding visa fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. You are being detained." They pulled her hands behind her back. They were careful because of her stomach, but they were not gentle. The handcuffs clicked. That sound, metallic, final, was the loudest thing in the world. Meanwhile, they were bringing Mateo down from the roof. He came down the ladder slowly, an agent waiting at the bottom with a weapon drawn. When Mateo's boots hit the driveway, he was spun around and cuffed against the garage wall. He was furious. He was spitting curses in Spanish. He looked at Carlos, who was already in the back of an SUV. Then he looked at Emily. And then he realized. He realized the game was over. He realized that the comfortable life, the extortion money, the future they had planned on my dime, it was all gone. And he saw Emily being led away, screaming about being a citizen's wife. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct. It overrides loyalty. It overrides love. And Mateo was a survivor. "Hey!" Mateo shouted at the agents. He twisted his head to look at Miller. "You want the truth? You want the whole file?" "Shut your mouth," the agent holding him said. "No. Listen." Mateo yelled, his eyes locking onto me. He wanted to hurt me. He thought he could still draw blood. He pointed his chin at Emily. "She's lying. She's always lying." Emily stopped struggling. She stared at Mateo, horror in her eyes. "Mateo, no," she pleaded. "Tell him." Mateo laughed. A cruel, desperate sound. "Tell the gringo. The baby isn't his." The words hung in the damp air. The neighbors had come out onto their porches. The world stopped. "It's mine," Mateo screamed, grinning like a wolf caught in a trap. "That's my son. We played you, man. We played you like a cheap guitar. She was going to take your house and leave you with nothing." The agents shoved him toward the vehicle. "Shut up," he was told. But the damage was intended for me. Mateo thought he was dropping a bomb. He thought he was destroying me. He didn't know the bomb had already detonated in my heart days ago. He was just clearing the rubble. I didn't flinch. I didn't scream. I simply looked at him with a flat, bored expression. "I know," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the sudden silence, it carried. Mateo froze. The grin vanished. He looked confused. "I know," I repeated. "I knew before you got here. Who do you think unlocked the gate?" The realization hit him. His eyes went wide. He looked from me to the agents, connecting the dots. He wasn't the predator. He was the prey. I hadn't been tricked. I had been the hunter. The agents shoved him into the back of the second SUV. The door slammed. I turned my gaze to Emily. She was standing by the open door of a government vehicle. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining the makeup she had applied so carefully. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was looking at me with a mixture of terror and disbelief. The foundation of her reality, that I was soft, that I was blind, that I was easily manipulated, had collapsed. "Michael," she whispered, "please, the baby." I walked slowly down the driveway. I stopped 5 feet from her. I didn't cross the line. The agents watched me, but they didn't intervene. Miller gave me a nod. "The baby will be taken care of," I said. "The state has protocols. If he is born here, he is a citizen. But you..." I looked at her, searching for the woman I had loved. I saw only the fugitive. I saw Elena Rodriguez. "You're evicted," I said. It was a cold, architectural term. Not, "I hate you." Not goodbye. Evicted. Removed from the premises because the lease was violated. She sobbed, her knees buckling. The female agents held her up. "Why?" She choked out. "Why didn't you just divorce me?" "Because," I said, leaning in slightly, my voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "You signed a contract. You agreed to be my wife. You broke the terms. And in my house, nobody steals from the foundation and walks away." I straightened up. I nodded to Agent Miller. Take her. The agent guided her into the back seat. She looked back at me one last time through the darkening glass as the door closed. Her face was a portrait of absolute regret. Not regret for what she did, but regret that she had underestimated the man she was sleeping next to. The convoy began to move. The SUVs reversed out of the driveway with efficient speed. In less than 5 minutes, they were gone. The street was empty again. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was the silence of a vacuum. I stood alone in the driveway. The ladder was still leaning against the garage. The stack of cash was still on the workbench, untouched. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was standing on her lawn, clutching her bathrobe, staring at me with her mouth open. "Everything okay, Michael?" she called out, her voice trembling. I looked at her. I adjusted my cuffs. I smoothed my shirt. "Just a contractor dispute, Mrs. Gable," I said calmly. "They didn't have the right permits." I turned and walked back into the house. I closed the front door. I locked it. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I walked into the living room. The "Welcome Baby Anderson" banner was still hanging, one side drooping where the tape had failed. I reached up and ripped it down. I balled it up in my fist. I walked to the kitchen. I saw the coffee mug I had left on the counter. I felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of exhaustion. My legs felt heavy like lead columns. I sat down on a bar stool. It was over. The structure was demolished. The site was cleared. But as I sat there, in the quiet of the empty house, I realized something. Demolition is only the first phase. Now, I was left with a vacant lot. I was left with a crater where my life used to be. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a dull, aching throb in my chest. I wasn't triumphant. There is no triumph in destroying your own home to get rid of the termites. There is only the grim satisfaction of knowing that the rot is gone. I took my phone out of my pocket. I dialed Sterling, the lawyer. "It's done," I said when he answered. "They have her. They have all of them." "Good," Sterling said. His voice was dry. "Do not speak to anyone else. I will handle the filing for the annulment on the grounds of fraud immediately. With the arrest record and the deportation proceedings, it will be a formality. The I-864 will be nullified. What about the child?" I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. "Not your concern, Mr. Anderson," Sterling said. "Biology dictates paternity. Citizenship dictates custody. If she is deported, the child goes with her, or into the system until she can claim him. It is a tragedy, yes, but it is not your tragedy." I hung up. Not my tragedy. I walked upstairs. I went into the nursery. The disassembled crib was still on the floor. The sage green walls were soft and calming. I stood over the pieces of wood. I thought about the son who wasn't mine. I thought about the heartbeat I had heard. I knelt down. I picked up a screwdriver. I started to take the screws out of the baseboard. I wasn't going to build the crib. I was going to strip the room. I was going to repaint it. I was going to turn it into an office, a library, anything but a nursery. I worked methodically. Twist, turn, remove. Twist, turn, remove. My hands were steady. My eyes were dry. I was an architect. I knew how to build. And I knew that before you can build something new, you have to clear the debris. The house was quiet. The rain started again, tapping against the window. It was a clean sound, a washing sound. I was alone. And for the first time in 3 years, I was safe. The nightmare was over. The waking up had just begun. I looked at the wall where I had planned to hang a picture of a happy family. It was blank. A blank canvas, I whispered to myself. I threw the screwdriver into the toolbox. It landed with a clatter. Time to draft a new blueprint. The machinery of a state is not elegant. It does not move with the fluid grace of a suspension bridge or the soaring ambition of a skyscraper. It is a grinder. It is a compactor. It is a system of gears and levers designed to process human lives into file numbers, court dates, and final dispositions. For the last 3 weeks, I have been standing at the controls of this machine, feeding it paper, evidence, and truth, watching it strip away the layers of the woman I once called my wife until nothing remained but a name on a deportation order. The hearing took place in a windowless room in the federal building in downtown Seattle. It was not a grand courtroom with mahogany benches and a jury box. It was an administrative chamber sterile and functional, lit by the harsh, buzzing hum of fluorescent tubes that turned everyone's skin a sickly shade of gray. The air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a room designed for bureaucracy, not drama. I sat at a plain laminate table next to Mr. Sterling. My lawyer looked bored, which reassured me. Boredom in a lawyer means they are confident. Across the aisle, Emily, or rather, Elena Maria Rodriguez, sat with a public defender who looked overworked and young, a man whose suit was slightly too large for his frame. She wore a standard-issue jumpsuit, a dull orange that clashed violently with the pale, exhausted complexion of her face. Her hair, usually styled and glossy, hung limp around her shoulders. She wasn't wearing makeup. Without the artifice, without the costume of the suburban wife, she looked younger, smaller, and undeniably terrified. She kept glancing at me, her eyes darting to my face, searching for a crack in the facade, a hint of the man who used to bring her tea in bed. She found no one. I was not her husband today. I was the witness. I was the architect of her undoing. The immigration judge was a woman with steel gray hair and a voice like dry parchment. She shuffled the files on her bench, the files I had compiled, the files Sterling had submitted. The weight of the evidence was physical. It sat between us, a brick wall that Emily could not climb. "Mr. Anderson," the judge said, not looking up, "you have submitted a petition for the annulment of marriage based on fraud, concurrent with the government's motion for removal. Do you affirm that the information provided regarding the respondent's identity is true to the best of your knowledge?" I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. "I affirm, Your Honor." The proceedings were dry, clinical, and devastatingly fast. Sterling laid it out like a blueprint. He presented the timeline. He presented the Venezuelan passport found in the lockbox. He presented the Florida warrant. He presented the financial records showing the extortion payments to Mateo Vasquez. Then came the paternity. The public defender tried to object. He spoke about the sanctity of the family, about the hardship deportation would cause to a pregnant woman. He tried to paint me as a vindictive spouse, a man scorned who was using the law as a weapon. "Your Honor," the defender said, his voice rising with theatrical indignation, "Mr. Anderson is abandoning his own child. He is casting out a vulnerable woman who made mistakes out of desperation. This is a moral failing, if not a legal one." Sterling didn't even stand up. He simply slid a piece of paper across the table to the judge. "Exhibit D," Sterling said calmly. "DNA analysis performed by a certified laboratory. The probability of paternity from Michael Anderson is 0%. The respondent has knowingly misled the petitioner to secure sponsorship under the affidavit of support. This marriage was not a partnership. It was a procurement of visa status under false pretenses." The judge looked at the paper. She looked at Emily. "Is this true, Ms. Rodriguez?" the judge asked. Emily didn't answer. She looked down at her hands, which were clasped tightly over her stomach. Her silence was a confession. It was the sound of a structure collapsing under its own weight. The judge sighed. It was a sound of fatigue, the sound of someone who had seen this story 1,000 times. Based on the evidence of identity fraud, the existence of a prior outstanding warrant, and the clear indication that the marriage was entered into for the primary purpose of evading immigration laws, I am granting the annulment. The marriage is void ab initio. It never legally existed. Consequently, the I-864 affidavit of support is nullified. She banged her gavel. It wasn't a loud noise, just a sharp wooden click. "Ms. Rodriguez, you are remanded to the custody of ICE pending immediate removal to your country of origin. The child, upon birth, will be a U.S. citizen, and custody determination will be handled by the Department of Social Services unless a suitable guardian is appointed." It was over. In 20 minutes, 3 years of my life were legally erased. I didn't look at her as the bailiffs stood her up. I gathered my papers. I put them in my briefcase. I turned to leave. "Michael." Her voice was a ragged whisper. I stopped near the door. I turned my head slightly, not enough to face her fully, but enough to acknowledge the sound. She was crying, but it wasn't the manipulative weeping I had seen before. This was the raw, ugly crying of someone who realizes they have fallen off the edge of the world. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm sorry." I looked at her. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was the feeling of walking through a building after a fire. The heat is gone, but the smell of ash remains. "You're not sorry you did it, Elena," I said softly. "You're sorry the plan failed." The bailiffs led her away through a side door. I walked out into the corridor where the air was cooler. Sterling clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Clean break," he said. "As clean as it gets. You're free, Michael." I nodded. Free. The word echoed in the hallway. Freedom is a strange thing. It is defined by what you don't have. I didn't have a wife. I didn't have a child. I didn't have a lie. I had a void, and now I had to learn how to live in it. 2 days later, I received a notification that the transport was scheduled. I didn't have to go. Sterling advised against it. He said there was no point, that it would only be painful. But I'm a man who needs to see the final inspection. I need to sign off on the project. I need to see the keys handed over. I drove to the detention center near the airport. It was a bleak, concrete facility surrounded by high fences topped with razor wire. It looked like a warehouse for unwanted goods. I requested a final visitation. Because the annulment was final, I was technically a stranger, but Sterling had pulled some strings, framing it as a necessary meeting to finalize the handover of personal property. I sat in a booth with a thick glass partition. On the other side, Elena was brought in. She sat down. She looked tired, her face puffy. She looked at me with a mixture of resentment and resignation. "I brought your things," I said, speaking into the intercom. "Your clothes. The photos from the box. I didn't keep anything." I pushed a duffel bag through the transfer drawer. The guard checked it and passed it to her. She didn't open it. She just stared at me through the glass. "Why did you come?" she asked. "To gloat? To see me in a cage?" "No," I said. "I came to ask you one question." She waited, her eyes hard. "Was there ever a moment?" I asked. "In 3 years. Was there a single moment where you forgot the plan? Where you actually just live with me?" She looked away, toward the gray wall of the visiting room. She stayed silent for a long time. I watched the second hand on the clock on the wall tick by. "When you paid off my student loans," she said quietly, her voice distorted by the speaker. I felt relieved. I thought, maybe this can work. Maybe I can be this person. She looked back at me. But then Mateo called, and I remembered who I really was. "You can't build a house on top of a sinkhole, Michael. You know that better than anyone." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. She was right. I had been trying to build a sanctuary on a foundation of secrets. I had ignored the cracks because I wanted the facade to be real. I was just as guilty of the delusion as she was of the fraud. "Good luck, Elena," I said. I stood up. I didn't wait for her to respond. I hung up the intercom receiver. I walked out of the room, down the long corridor, and out into the daylight. The rain had stopped. The sky was breaking, revealing patches of cold, hard blue. I drove to a spot near the perimeter of SeaTac Airport. There's a small park, mostly used by plane spotters, that overlooks the tarmac. I parked my car and stood by the fence, gripping the cold chain links. I had the flight number. It wasn't a commercial flight. It was a government charter, a white plane with no airline logo, just a tail number. It sat on a remote part of the runway, surrounded by buses. I used a pair of binoculars I kept in my car for sight surveys. I focused on the stairs leading up to the plane. I saw a line of figures. They were shackled, moving slowly, men and women. I scanned the line, and then I saw her. She was struggling with the steps, her pregnancy making the climb difficult. A marshal held her arm, guiding her. She paused at the top of the stairs. She turned around, looking back at the city, at the skyline of Seattle rising in the distance like a jagged glass mountain. From this distance, she was just a speck, a flaw in the landscape. She stepped into the dark fuselage. The door closed. I watched as the engine spooled up. The heat shimmer distorted the air behind the plane. It taxied to the runway. It gathered speed, and then it lifted off. I watched it climb until it was just a dot in the clouds, heading south, heading away, taking the lie with it. I lowered the binoculars. The runway was empty. The concrete was bare. I got back in my car and drove home. The house was silent when I entered. It was a silence that had texture. It felt heavy, like a blanket. I walked through the living room. The furniture was still there, but it felt like a stage set after the actors had gone home. The blue balloons I had popped were in the trash. The banner was gone. I went to the kitchen. I opened the fridge. Her yogurt was still there. I took it out and threw it in the bin. I went through the pantry. Her herbal teas, her specific brand of crackers, I threw it all out. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of clearing the site. You cannot start new construction until the debris is removed. I went upstairs. I walked past the master bedroom. I couldn't go in there yet. The bed was still made, the pillows arranged the way she liked them. That room would need to be gutted. New carpet, new paint. Maybe I would knock down a wall, change the dimensions. I went to the nursery. This was the hardest room. The sage green walls mocked me with their promise of new life. The disassembled crib lay on the floor like the bones of a prehistoric animal. I rolled up my sleeves. I began to carry the pieces of the crib out to the garage. I didn't disassemble them further. I just hauled the wood out, piling it next to the recycling bins. I took the changing table, the rocking chair, the unopened boxes of diapers. I moved with a mechanical rhythm. Lift, carry, drop. Lift, carry, drop. When the room was empty of furniture, I brought in the ladder and a bucket of paint. White. Pure, clinical, architectural white. I poured the paint into the tray. I dipped the roller. I covered the sage green. I covered the hope. I covered the betrayal. Stroke by stroke, the room vanished. It ceased to be a nursery. It became a box. A volume of space defined by 4 planes. The physical exertion felt good. My muscles burned. My mind went blank, focusing only on the coverage, the texture, the edge where the wall met the ceiling. It took me 4 hours. When I was finished, the room smelled of fresh paint, a clean, chemical scent that masked everything else. I stood in the center of the white room. The sun was setting, casting long, rectangular shadows across the floor. It was empty. It was perfect. I went downstairs to my study. I sat at my desk. The house was dark now, but I didn't turn on the lights. The glow of my computer monitor was the only illumination. I opened the folder labeled Project Demolition. It contained everything. The scans of the passports, the audio recordings, the photos of the text messages, the video of the arrest I had pulled from the security cameras. It was a digital monument to the last month of my life. It was the evidence of my victory. But looking at it now, I realized I didn't want a monument. Monuments are for things you want to remember. I wanted to forget. I wanted to erase. I selected the entire folder. I hovered the mouse over the trash icon. My phone rang. The sound was startlingly loud in the quiet house. I looked at the screen. Mom. I stared at it. I hadn't told her yet. She was still waiting for updates on the baby, on the happy couple. She lived in Ohio, far away from the wreckage. I picked up the phone. Hello. My voice was raspy from the paint fumes. Michael? Is it you? You sound tired. My mother's voice was warm, concerned. How is everything? How is Emily? Is the baby okay? I closed my eyes. I could tell her the truth. I could tell her about the fraud, the police, the deportation. I could unleash the drama and the scandal. I could make myself the victim and let her comfort me. But that would make a story. That would give it life. That would make Elena Rodriguez a permanent character in my history. I looked at the white walls of the study. I looked at the delete button on my screen. Mom, I said. There. There was a complication. Oh no, she gasped. The baby. There is no baby. I said. It wasn't a lie. There was no Anderson baby. And Emily. Emily is gone. Gone? What do you mean gone? Michael, you're scaring me. It didn't work out, Mom, I said, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. It wasn't what we thought it was. We ended it. She went back, home. Oh, Michael, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I looked at the screen. I clicked the mouse. Are you sure you want to permanently delete these items? Yes. The folder vanished. The hard drive whirred for a second, then went silent. I'm fine, Mom, I said. I'm really fine. I'm just cleaning up. Do you want me to come out there? She asked. No, I said quickly. No, I need to do this myself. I need to get the house ready. Ready for what? I looked out the window at the empty driveway, at the street where the black SUVs had swarmed, at the roof where Mateo had been cornered. It was all gone. The rain had washed the tire tracks away. For whatever comes next, I said. I hung up the phone. I sat in the dark for a long time. The house settled around me, the wood cooling, the pipes groaning. It was a big house for one man, maybe too big. I opened my architectural software. A blank grid appeared on the screen. I started to draw lines. Not a renovation of this house. Something new, a smaller structure, something with more glass, more transparency. A structure where nothing could be hidden in the walls. I wasn't just an architect of buildings. I was an architect of my own reality. I had identified the structural failure. I had condemned the property. I had overseen the demolition. Now I was staring at the empty lot. The ground was rough, scarred by the removal of the old foundation. It was ugly. It was barren, but it was mine. I typed a file name into the save box. Concept_01. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a house that belonged solely to me. I began to design.